Hello guys, and welcome to another J for JavaScript tutorial. In this short tutorial, we'll be building our first JS project, and that is our simple calculator. I believe project-based learning is one of the best ways to learn any new skills, be it in coding or anything that interests you. So I encourage you follow along and try as much as best to do what I'm trying to do or implement or add a feature to this calculator or anything you might find interesting to you. So let's go through a quick demo of this calculator. As you can see, it can do the basic arithmetic operations like add, multiply, divide, and subtract, so on and so forth. As you can see, it can also clear everything. It can delete one character at a time. And if you notice, whenever we click, there's these annoying, ugly blue highlights that show up on the buttons, and now that is something we're going to fix real time in our build that has not been fixed in this demo. Another thing for you to know that we have also created for invalid expressions. So yes, if you write down a wrong formula, it will return invalid expression. What in this calculator, we're going to look at CSS grid, HTML5, and finally JavaScript. I won't be spending much time on the HTML and CSS. I presume you have some CSS knowledge and HTML. So our main focus will be on how JavaScript handles all these events and returns the results in the input. So that will be our main focus. But I'll try and explain the code snippets that I will be copying from this code pen, which is available, which I will provide the link in the description below, and pasting it in our text editor. You can also find the final code on this GitHub repository. And yes, I'll be using VS Code as my text editor. It's really simple, fast, and has a lot of extensions like the live server, as you can see, is running right now on my PC here in my HTML code. So that's about it. Let's get started. And just before I continue, I have included timestamps in this tutorial, so you can skip to the part that interests you the most, whether it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and follow along there. Okay, let's start with our HTML building blocks. As I said, I'll be getting my code snippets from my code pen, which I'll provide the link in the description below. As you can see, this is our HTML. Let's copy that and paste it here. Our live server should be reflecting the changes. As you can see, we get the changes in our HTML. So let's start from the top. From the top, we have the opening tag, which is a doc type HTML. And then we have the head. And then inside the title, that's why we put in the title. You can name it anything you want, really. Then we have a link tag that references back to our styles file, which we can see here. And it should match the name of your file. If it does not match, your CSS will not be communicating with the HTML. So make sure it's the same name. Otherwise, you will not get your styles will not reflect on your page. Okay. So we have our section. In our body, we have a section. In a section, we have a div container that contains all our content. And in the container, we have a div that has an ID of display. Now, our display is empty, and this is where we will inject our JavaScript later on. And inside our second div, we have a div of buttons, right? Div that has a class of buttons, and inside the div of buttons, we have multiple divs that holds the necessary buttons we need for our calculator. Notice how some div tags have IDs, and this will use the CSS selectors to give them different styles, different from other divs, as we will see later on in our CSS styling. After the divs, we have the ending div at the end of the section, and there we have our simple HTML layout. So Let me add this to our GitHub repository. If you don't know much on how we use GitHub, that we'll look at in later videos on how we use version control systems like GitHub, Bitbucket, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm just simply committing these changes to the remote repository so that anyone that wants to access this code on my GitHub repository will find it there. So let me create a branch for it. Just 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 now I'm pushing all these changes on my GitHub repository. So now if we check our GitHub repository, we should be getting that change in a moment. Sorry, I forgot to commit. Do this. Okay. And now as you can see, the changes are here. Now in this, we can simply create a repository, a pull request, create a pull request to be merged with the master. The master is a branch that always has the latest updates. You always want to be careful not to commit directly on your master to avoid problems. So we can merge this into our master and we should be good to check out our master again. And there we go. Now all these changes are now published on our master and we're good to go on the next phase, which is the CSS. Okay. Next to our CSS, as I said, let's close this for now. Copy it. And the changes should be reflected in the browser. As you can see, our CSS styles have been reflected in our code. So let's start from the top. What I did from the top is simply import a font family from Google Fonts. As you can see here, select a font, the numbers, the sizes you want, and then simply copy the import and then add it to your styles file, and you should be able to use that font family by simply using the font family element or the font family command. Then we have in the background, we have our colors. Of course, this you can change it to any color you want, to either this light blue, and you would still get that in your browser. So feel free to give it any color you want in the background. Then in a container, we have the max width of 400 pixels contained and a margin auto, which places it in the center. Then we have this box shadow, which again, you can give any color you wish to find and move it around to your liking. And you should have a different box shadow, as you can see around the edges. Again, play around with it to get the color you desire the most. Then we have a display. As you can see, this hashtag, this is simply a CSS selector selecting a specific element in our HTML, as we saw here, with an ID different from all other elements, which allows us to give it different classes or different different styles from the others, which is the white background, the height, which is auto. The auto allows us contains content, grows the container as much content as it has. automatically. That's why we used auto. And the line height is the distance between the two characters. And then the word wrap, break word, and the word break helps us break the text of characters in a new line without it continuing on the same line. So that's how we achieved this using the word wrap, word break, and the height of auto. Great. As you can see, we have another CSS selector of red with our clear button, delete with the yellow button, which again you can change those colors to your liking. The display grid, you can read more about CSS grid. Very, very beautiful way on how you can place and beautifully lay out your designs on a website. I highly recommend you get used to CSS grid. As you can see, it puts them in columns, in rows, and you can manipulate them anyhow. You can give them space, make them grow. Very flexible compared to the flex design in some cases. So we use the display grid, border bottom, the 1 pixel, which is this gray color you see here, border left. Then we gave it a template of columns 4 right, repeat by 4, then span 2 takes the whole space of an empty column. It takes the whole space. If you want to see the difference in that, we can see it here. If you say 1, it would only take 1 space. As you can see, our equals button here. Then if I say 2, to do the needful and expand to that column. So it's way easier to really lay out your designs using grid templates. Then went to the buttons div, which we added more border top with the solids. Then the buttons themselves individually, which you can see text align center, align height, all that. But there's something we see here, and that's the ugly, annoying highlight. You see, it's very annoying, and we didn't get to fix it in our demo. So by that, we can just simply use a user select and simply say none. So this will prevent ugly, annoying highlights, as you can see, and simple as that. So there we have fixed our bug. Next, we have our equal, another selector, which we wanted to give a green color. And finally, our hover, what our buttons should look like when we hover over them. So I highly recommend you look more into the CSS grid, how you can manipulate your layout of your calculator. But other than that, that was it for our CSS styling. Let's commit them on the repository. Create a new branch. Again, that should be reflected on our GitHub repository, and we should be able to create a pull request. In real world situation, you would have reviewers who review our code, our styling, our conventions, and all that. I just want to show you how we can seamlessly use GitHub to push and work on our projects remotely. And there we have it. We have our changes. Now let's check out our master and pull the latest changes. Great. Now we have all our changes in our master, and in this one branch. So if we go back to our calculator, it should be able to be functioning quite as well. All right. Now let's look at how we can add JavaScript to this simple calculator of ours and add functionality where if we press these buttons, we get them in the display here, as you can see in this white text here. And if we press equals, we get the results back. So let's start with linking our JavaScript file in the HTML. This is how we do it. We add our file, and if you are putting your script file on top, make sure to use the defer so that your JavaScript file is downloaded at the same time while your HTML page is being passed. Okay. Now, these are the following things we want to do. We want to get the specific elements by their ID and use that ID to do specific conditions or specific functions we want them to do. So if we look in our HTML, we know that our div here has an ID of display. So now let's get that ID using JavaScript. Notice we're using ES6 function, ES6 syntax, and we'll look at that along the way we build these projects and get familiar with it. We'll look at the DOM as well as we build projects. And this is how we access our ID. So this is the ID we will be using throughout the JavaScript file and giving it specific conditions to follow. So now next let's target the buttons. So what we're going to do, we're going to convert the HTML collection we get from our results and then convert it to an array. Notice we didn't assign any IDs to our button, so we can use class name or query selector or query selector all, but since we're using class name, we don't need to do that. We can use the class name to access that specific class in our HTML element. And what we should get in the console is an HTML collection, which is like an object of some sort. As you can see, there are over 18 properties in this HTML collection, but we want it to be an array so that we can be able to map through our array and add an event listener. So how are we going to do that? We simply use the array from method. And you should be getting back an array in the console, as you can see. Now, using this array, we are going to map through. We can console log out, or sorry, comment out the console. Now we're going to map through our array using the map functions, which we looked at in the arrays data type. For each or through all the buttons, add an event listener, which is a click. So let us see if our buttons are clicking or are returning anything. As you can see, the event is being triggered and each button is being clicked. Let us also look the target, which specific element is being clicked on. Now when we click on 5, it shows us that div class with the button 5 is being clicked on. So div element with the class button is the target of that event. So now let's return a specific target, a specific value of that element. And inner text is one way of us returning that specific value. As you can see, 2 is clicked and 2 is the inner text of the targeted event. Great. With this information, we can now use our switch case to return all these in our display. As you can see, I can comment out the console for your purpose. So now with that, let's use a switch case. Let's set with the default value. If you're wondering where the display is coming from, it is the ID we declared up above. And right there, you see our values are being displayed on the screen as desired. Great. Now let's create various cases. For example, if I press C, my content should disappear. If I press delete, it should delete one character from the right one by one. So let's start with a clear. You want to make sure you break through your statement so that your characters are not displayed on the screen as well. So if you press C, everything disappears and it's working as it should. Now we want to delete one character at once. How do we do that? Well, we shall use the slice method as we saw in the previous videos. Again, break. And our case should be deleting one character from the last in the array one by one, as you can see. Great. And finally, we want to be able to perform arithmetic operations when you, for example, you want to add 66 or you want to subtract and do all those kind of maths. Fortunate for us, there's an inbuilt JavaScript function called eval or evaluation that does that for us. So when someone clicks on the equals, simple as that, evaluate and return the result on the display. As you can see, again, always remember to add a break to break from your statement. As you can see, everything works the way it should be working. You can clear, you can add, you can add, you can clear, and looks pretty good to go. One more thing we can do is add an error when someone tries to perform an invalid expression. How we can do that is using a try catch block. A try catch block is very good, and that's under the error handling in JavaScript. It helps you narrow down your chances of debugging. So on our first try, we want to evaluate our numbers, and on a fail, well, catch the error and return it. Simple. So let's try again. Oh, well, see, invalid expression. So let's close this console. As you can see, our calculator is pretty much done. And there we go. Simple methods we looked at. We have added our switch case, our try catch block to catch any invalid expressions, and we have our beautiful calculator. So this is it. Let's now add this to our GitHub repository. As always, check our Git. And there we have it. So our calculator in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We have looked at switch case, try catch block, arrays, CSS grid, and GitHub, VS Code. We've looked at all these interesting methods and techniques we use while developing some of the projects. This has been a fun one. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next build. I'll leave all the links in the description to my code pen and to the GitHub for you to play around with these, and see you in the next one. Thank you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and yep, join the Slack community, J for JavaScript. Bye bye.